The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B did not just close, they sealed the tomb of Julian Vance's absolute certainty with a dull, echoing thud that vibrated through the soles of Clara Sterling's feet. Inside the grand, high-ceilinged room of the Blackwood County Probate Court, the atmosphere was suffocating, thick with the chemical chill of industrial air conditioning and the overpowering, cloying scent of expensive, stolen French perfume radiating from Beatrice Vance. Julian sat precisely 3 feet away at the defense table, his tailored $5,000 charcoal suit perfectly molded to his broad shoulders, his posture dripping with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed the world was his personal ledger. Beside him, his mother Beatrice draped her wrinkled, heavily jeweled hands over a pristine white crocodile leather purse, her thin lips curved into a predatory, venomous sneer that she didn't bother to hide. Their hyper-aggressive, elite corporate attorney, Marcus Thorne, was already sorting through a mountain of gold-embossed folders, his movements sharp, practiced, and theater-ready. Clara sat in absolute dead silence at the plaintiff's table, her hands resting lightly, flatly against the dark varnished mahogany surface, her fingers perfectly still. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic, and entirely devoid of the frantic panic they so desperately wanted to see. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black blazer, her eyes fixed not on her ex-husband's mocking grin, but on the blank, polished wooden gavel resting on the judge's elevated bench. Julian leaned over the wooden divider, the gold links of his watch catching the harsh fluorescent light, his voice a low, dripping hiss that carried across the quiet room. "You should have taken the settlement, Clara, because by noon today you won't even have a roof over your head, let alone your precious family name." Beatrice let out a soft, sharp titter of amusement, adjusting her pearl necklace with a click of her long, manicured nails. "Let her savor the silence, Julian. It is the only luxury she has left before the marshals throw her cheap suitcases onto the gravel drive of Sterling Manor, where they belong." Clara did not blink. She did not turn her head. Her facial muscles remained completely immobile, a mask of cold, calculating stoicism that seemed to irritate Julian more than any angry retort ever could. Her attorney, Evelyn Cross, sat beside her, methodically unscrewing the cap of a fountain pen, her expression equally unreadable, her entire demeanor resembling a sniper waiting for the target to step into the clearing. The air in the courtroom grew heavier as the side door opened and Judge Harrison Vance walked in, his black robes billowing slightly, his face set in a stern, unchanging mask of judicial authority. Everyone rose, the scraping of chairs cutting through the tension like a blade. As Judge Vance took his seat and adjusted his gold-rimmed reading glasses, Julian leaned back, crossing his legs with a slow, smug satisfaction, completely convinced that the trap he had spent 18 months constructing was about to snap shut on the woman who had dared to think she was his equal. The clerk announced the case of Vance versus Sterling, the words echoing off the cold wood paneling, signaling the start of an execution Julian believed he had already paid for. Clara felt the slight vibration of the air conditioning against her skin, her internal clock ticking down the seconds, her mind registering every micro-expression on Julian's face, cataloging his pride, his greed, and the utter certainty that would soon become his undoing. Marcus Thorne stood up first, smoothing his tie with a predatory confidence that signaled the opening move of a brutal, calculated hit. The battle for Sterling Manor was finally underway, and the room was thick with the scent of impending, manufactured ruin. Marcus Thorne stepped forward into the center of the well, his expensive leather shoes clicking with aggressive precision against the polished floorboards as he cleared his throat to deliver the crushing blow. "Your Honor, this is not a complex matter of marital asset division, but a straightforward case of illegal occupancy and systemic financial deception perpetrated by the plaintiff, Clara Sterling." Thorne unclasped a thick leather dossier with a dramatic flourish, sliding 3 sets of certified gold-embossed documents onto the clerk's desk with a confidence that felt like a physical weight in the room. "We have submitted into evidence the verified financial ledgers of Apex Crest Holdings, the primary investment vehicle managed by my client, Julian Vance. These documents, backed by certified audits, conclusively prove that over the last 3 years, Sterling Manor was systematically utilized as primary cross-collateral for a series of massive liquidity injections totaling $42 million. Clara continued to stare directly ahead, her breathing remaining perfectly flat, her ribs barely moving beneath her black blazer while Julian's grin widened, his teeth flashing under the courtroom lights. Thorne adjusted his silk tie, his voice rising to strike the gallery. The primary lender for these transactions was Vanguard Regional Bank, and due to the plaintiff's complete failure to maintain the property's financial obligations, the bank initiated an immediate foreclosure action 4 weeks ago. My client, acting purely out of a desire to protect what remained of the family's public standing, used his personal corporate capital to purchase the assignment of that primary mortgage and the accompanying foreclosure rights. In plain terms, Your Honor, Julian Vance now owns the debt, he owns the deed, and Clara Sterling is currently nothing more than a trespassing tenant in a property that legally belongs to Apex Crest Holdings. Beatrice Vance leaned forward, her chest heaving with a silent, ecstatic laughter, her fingers gripping her white crocodile bag so tightly the leather groaned. Judge Harrison Vance peered over his gold-rimmed glasses, his brow furrowing deeply as he flipped through the thick stack of financial instruments, his pen hovering ominously over an immediate eviction and asset transfer order. The judge turned his cold, piercing gaze down toward Clara's table, his voice echoing with a heavy, unyielding judicial weight. Mrs. Sterling, these documents appear to be legally airtight, fully notarized, and registered with the state banking authority. Unless your counsel can present an immediate, legally binding instrument that invalidates this primary debt assignment, I am prepared to sign the execution of eviction and transfer control of the entire Sterling estate to the defense by the end of this morning's session. Julian leaned toward Clara, his voice a low, toxic whisper that barely carried across the mahogany table. It's over, Clara. You lose the house, you lose the name, and you leave this room with nothing but the clothes on your back. Clara's fingers did not twitch. Her eyes remained fixed on the judge's pen, her face an unreadable block of absolute granite as she felt the entire courtroom brace for her total destruction. Judge Harrison Vance lowered his pen, the tip a mere fraction of an inch from the crisp white paper of the eviction decree, the silence in the courtroom so absolute that the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of the wall clock sounded like a countdown to execution. Before the metal nib could touch the surface, Evelyn Cross stood up with a slow, deliberate grace, her chair sliding back without making a single sound against the floorboards. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, we request permission to submit an immediate, dispositive counterfiling that renders the defense's entire motion not only moot, but patently fraudulent. Marcus Thorne let out a short, mocking laugh, shaking his head as he leaned back against his table, crossing his arms over his chest. Your Honor, this is a transparent delay tactic from a desperate counsel who has run out of legal avenues. The mortgage assignment is already executed, and Vanguard Regional Bank has fully signed over the rights. Evelyn did not even look at Thorne. She simply lifted a single, heavy navy blue leather binder from her briefcase and dropped it onto the mahogany table with a dull, booming thud that echoed off the high walls. At precisely 9:02 this morning, the Federal Banking Authority approved and finalized the total institutional acquisition of Vanguard Regional Bank by Sterling Global Trusts, a private entity funded entirely by my client's dormant ancestral trust fund. Julian's smug smile flickered, a sudden, momentary shadow passing over his eyes as his posture stiffened. Evelyn opened the binder, her voice remaining perfectly calm, razor-sharp and icy. My client did not merely contest the foreclosure, she purchased the entire lending institution, including its complete historical ledger, every outstanding debt instrument, and every underlying commercial portfolio. More importantly, Your Honor, upon taking ownership of Vanguard Regional Bank 90 minutes ago, our forensic compliance team audited the specific toxic debt portfolio tied to Apex Crest Holdings, the front company owned exclusively by Julian Vance. What Mr. Thorne conveniently omitted from his theatrical presentation is that the $42 million in liquidity injections he referenced were not legitimate corporate loans, but highly irregular, uncollateralized credit lines obtained through systemic document falsification and cross-border asset inflation. Julian's mother, Beatrice, stopped shifting her weight, her manicured hands freezing completely over her crocodile purse as her breathing turned shallow. Evelyn pulled 3 bright red certified documents from the binder, sliding them directly toward the bailiff to be passed to the bench. By submitting those forged mortgage agreements into this court record just moments ago to prove his ownership of the manor, Julian Vance has formally, under penalty of perjury, verified his personal direct signature on documents that explicitly acknowledge his total liability for $98 million in cross-collateralized commercial defaults. He did not buy a leverage point against my client. He walked directly into the vault of an institution she now owns, locked the door behind himself, and handed her the key to his absolute financial annihilation. Clara turned her head slowly, her cold, unblinking green eyes locking onto Julian's face for the very first time, her expression completely detached as she watched the first visible bead of sweat break across his forehead. The color did not just leave Julian's face, it drained away in a sudden, violent wave, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of ash gray that made the dark fabric of his expensive suit look absurdly oversized. A single heavy bead of sweat detached itself from his hairline, tracking a slow, wet path down his temple and pooling in the deep crease of his clenched jawline before dripping onto his silk collar. Across the table, Beatrice Vance's fingers tightened around her white crocodile purse with such frantic, spasmodic force that the metal clasp let out a sharp, metallic snap, her breath escaping her lungs in a ragged, whistling gasp. Marcus Thorne stood frozen in the center of the well, his mouth slightly open, his hands still extended toward the clerk's desk as his eyes darted frantically across the certified acquisition documents Evelyn Cross had just laid bare. "Your Honor, my client, this is a highly irregular interpretation of banking compliance," Thorne stammered, his voice losing its booming, theatrical resonance and rising an octave into a tense, desperate pitch. Evelyn Cross did not grant him a single millimeter of space, her voice cutting through his stammer like a scalpel through soft tissue. "It is not an interpretation, Mr. Thorne. It is a mathematical certainty. By entering those specific asset logs into the record under oath to claim title over Sterling Manor, your client has legally tied his own neck to a cross-collateralized liability structure that allows the primary lender to demand immediate, total liquidation upon discovery of material fraud." Julian tried to stand up, his knees shaking slightly as his hands slammed down onto the defense table, his knuckles turning stark white against the dark wood. "This is a lie. She doesn't have that kind of money. That trust fund was locked by her grandfather's estate. Sit down, Mr. Vance." Judge Harrison Vance roared, his voice exploding through the quiet courtroom like a thunderclap as he slammed his hand flat against the bench, his face turning an angry, dangerous shade of crimson. The judge was no longer looking at the eviction order. His eyes were fixed on the federal compliance certificates, his brow furrowed so deeply it formed a dark shadow across his forehead. Marcus Thorne looked down at the documents in his own hands, his chest heaving as he realized the legal landmine his client had guided him directly into. Thorne's professional survival instinct kicked in with brutal, instantaneous clarity. He looked at Julian, then at the judge, and immediately stepped 2 paces away from the defense table, completely severing his physical alignment with his client. "Your Honor, in light of these newly presented corporate disclosures, and given that my firm was provided with asset verifications that appear to be fundamentally compromised, I must formally state on the record that my office was completely unaware of any underlying balance sheet inflation. We request an immediate recess, and I must formally tender my request to recuse myself from representing Apex Crest Holdings effective immediately." Beatrice let out a sharp, choked shriek of betrayal, her head snapping toward the lawyer as her pearl necklace clicked loudly against her throat. "Marcus, you can't leave us. We paid you a retainer." Julian collapsed back into his leather chair, the air leaving his body in a hollow thud as he watched his high-priced defender abandon him on the battlefield, leaving him entirely exposed to the woman who still sat 3 feet away, staring at him with the absolute terrifying stillness of a winter frost. Judge Harrison Vance didn't just slam his gavel, he struck the wooden block with a ferocious, ringing crack that echoed like a rifle shot off the high mahogany walls, freezing Beatrice mid-shriek and causing Julian to flinch violently in his seat. Silence. This court will not tolerate a circus, and it will certainly not be used as a playground for institutional bank fraud. The judge's eyes burned with a righteous, unyielding fury as he glared down from his elevated bench, his face darkened by the sheer audacity of the scheme that had unfolded before him. He pulled the defense's proposed eviction order toward himself, took both sides in his large hands, and tore the thick parchment completely in half with a sharp, definitive rip that sounded like dry bones snapping. Motion for eviction is denied with absolute prejudice. The judge leaned forward, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying register that made the court reporter's fingers fly across the machine. Based on the certified federal banking records submitted by the plaintiff, it is clear to this court that the defense has engaged in a calculated, systemic conspiracy to manufacture a fraudulent foreclosure using overinflated, cross-collateralized corporate debts. Therefore, this court invokes its full equitable powers to order an immediate, total freeze on every domestic and international bank account, asset ledger, and security holding associated with Julian Vance, Beatrice Vance, and Apex Crest Holdings. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His chest heaved in shallow, rapid hitches as he stared at the bench in absolute horror, his entire empire dissolving into digital thin air with a single judicial decree. The judge wasn't finished, his pen flying across a fresh order with a scratching sound that felt like a knife on glass. Furthermore, under the mandatory corporate disclosure rules of this state, 100% of the disputed marital assets, corporate shares, and real property holdings currently tied to the Vance family network are hereby transferred into the exclusive, unencumbered control of Clara Sterling pending immediate federal grand jury review. I am formally referring this entire file, along with the perjured documents submitted this morning, to the State Attorney General and the Federal Banking Authority for immediate criminal prosecution and asset seizure. Beatrice's face went completely purple, her hands flying to her throat as she let out a strangled, breathless wail, her white crocodile purse sliding off her lap and dumping its expensive contents onto the floorboards unheeded. Julian collapsed forward, his forehead pressing directly against the cold mahogany table, his hands clutching the sides of his head as the brutal reality of total bankruptcy and imminent imprisonment crushed him into nothingness. Clara remained perfectly still, her spine straight, her hands still resting flat against the table, her breathing as calm and measured as it had been when she first entered the room. She did not gloat, she did not smile. She simply watched the complete, chaotic destruction of her enemies with the detached interest of an apex predator observing an inevitable natural law. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a slow, heavy creak as Clara Sterling stood up, her movements fluid, precise, and entirely unhurried. She didn't glance back at the defense table, where Julian remained slumped over the dark wood, his shoulders shaking with the silent, ragged breaths of a broken man. Nor did she look at Beatrice, who was now on her knees on the polished floorboards, frantically trying to scoop her spilled lipsticks and gold credit cards back into her ruined purse while two uniformed state marshals closed in on either side of her. Clara smoothed the front of her black blazer with a single, calm pass of her hand, her fingers steady, her skin cool under the bright lobby lights as she stepped over the threshold and away from the wreckage of the Vance family name. Every click of her heels against the grand marble floor of the courthouse atrium sounded like a definitive, rhythmic period at the end of a long, dark chapter, a clean declaration of her absolute ownership over her own future. She walked out through the massive glass facade of the building into the brilliant, crisp morning sun, where a sleek black sedan was already waiting smoothly at the curb, its engine humming in a low, disciplined purr. Her attorney, Evelyn Cross, paused beside her for a fraction of a second, offering a single, sharp nod of mutual respect before turning toward the corporate offices of Sterling Global Trusts to finalize the complete liquidation of Julian's remaining holdings. Clara stepped into the back seat of the vehicle, the thick door closing with a heavy, pressurized seal that shut out the noise of the city, leaving her in the deep, luxurious silence of absolute victory. She looked out the tinted window as the car pulled away from the curb, watching the courthouse recede into the distance, her expression remaining beautifully detached, calm, and utterly free. If you love seeing arrogant schemers completely outsmarted and karma served perfectly cold, hit that like button right now to support the channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss another high-stakes showdown where justice takes everything back down to the last penny. Leave a comment below sharing your favorite moment of this absolute takedown, and let us know what kind of story you want to see next.